Welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hello, Rob. It's me, Diana.
Hello, friends. It's me, your lovable pal, Jackie.
Oh boy, it's so good to have everyone here. As a peek behind the curtain, this episode is being recorded way before it's coming out based on schedules and whatnot. It's a very exciting continuity break.
And most importantly, I'm using a Rock Band microphone.
Yes, from the game Rock Band.
Most importantly, and I can carry it around with me. I don't even have to put it on. I can just hold it and pretend that
it's got a long cord. You could go in the hallway. You could go anywhere.
I'm going to go to Diana's office with this Rock Band mic.
Yes, we are all in. Even though typically when it's just the three of us, we like to record in the same place, which is our little basement studio. We are actually all in different locations today. I'm in the studio, and then you guys are on assignment at your real jobs.
At our real job.
So we needed to find every mic that we could send elsewhere. We got some great different sound, different room sounds today. A lot of fun. But this isn't a podcast about microphones and sound effects. This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we discuss a topic related to the field and some relevant research articles. And this week, we're coming back to a previous episode and talking a little bit more about parent training and how BCBAs can support parents in the training of new skills to help their children that they care for, which is a topic that is very important to us, to you, to parents, to everybody, because parents are important parts of the treatment planning. So we'll be talking not a little bit about that. We'll actually be talking a lot about that. That's all we'll be talking about in today's episode. So, Diana, why don't you start us off by telling us what articles we'll be discussing?
I thought you were going to say, why don't you start off by telling you what makes you a good parent?
It's a lot easier to talk about being a good parent than it is to implement good parenting consistently.
It sure is.
But that is part of what our articles are going to touch on today. So the 4 articles we will be discussing include The Problem of Parental Non-Adherence in a Clinical Behavior Analysis, Effective Treatment is Not Enough by Allen and Warzak, and that was published in JABA back in the year 2000.
Man, I love that year.
That's a good year. We will also discuss effectiveness of parent-led applied behavior analysis and improving outcomes for parents of autistic children. That's by Sneed and Samuelson, published in the Journal of Social, Behavioral, and Health Sciences, 2022. Did you like that year, Jackie?
I could have gone without 2022.
Take it or leave it.
To be honest.
Yeah. Well, wait till you hear this. Teaching future school personnel to train parents to implement explicit instruction interventions. That was by Kupsik and Lebrow, published in Behavior Analysis and Practice, 2021.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
And then finally...
To the year, not to the article. I feel...
Oh, no, the article. Good. Finally, parent-implemented behavioral skills training of social skills. And that was by a whole crew. Dogan, King, Fischetti, Lake, Matthews, and Warzak once again. That was in JABA 2017. A banner year, I will say.
Banner year.
2017 is when I met my future... No.
Your current.
That can't be right.
No, that's not right. It was 27.
I was going to say.
2007. I was like... We've been together too long.
Hang on.
Man, remember the year 2000, everybody? It was like we'd done it. We'd solved all the problems. The end of history. Everything's going to be great from here on out. And then it was, wait, no, it never was great. It never was over. And then it's just been really just going strong since then. All nothing but up, right? Maybe in some ways. But anyway, let's talk about parent training, the more optimistic topic for today. Diana, why don't you... More relevant topic.
Go with.
Yeah. Diana, why don't you start us off? Because I know one of the issues that comes up when we talk about parent training for a lot of practitioners, depending on their setting, is I don't work that much with parents. I work with teachers. I work directly with students or children or administrators, right? And sometimes I see parents and they come to meetings and it's nice, and they're not necessarily always included as much as we'd like. And, people list reasons that can happen. But as I think we all should know, if we don't already, there are a lot of factors that go into both what makes good parent training and also the importance of including a parent training piece, not just as you're a part of the team, we're so glad you're here. Anyway, that's it. Go away now, which I think for all of us, we've had those moments where we have not given our parents the support that they needed to implement training or the voice that they should have in the planning. And I think we've all gotten better as a field. We've gotten better and better at that. But it sometimes still can be hard, especially if folks have been practicing a long time, I think, to recognize that, hey, even though you may be the expert in behavior analysis, you are not the expert in this specific client you're working with, this child, this individual you're working with, or this family unit. You know a lot, but you don't know them. And they need the voice and they need to be a part of that planning.
Was that a segue?
Yeah. I can do a better segue. Hold on one second. So when it comes to that planning, because there are a lot of factors that can make it very difficult for parents when they are just doing the basics of parenting or when they're joining in on collaborating on treatment. So I think Sneed and Alan and co have something to say about that. So Diana, start us off.
Okay, sure. So
was that better segue? You like that one?
Yeah, sure. So, we haven't dedicated an episode to talking about parents and parent training in quite a long time. So this is very much overdue. I'm really glad.
The last time we did, I didn't have a child, so that's super overdue. Remember we talked about how I was never going to have kids and that I was just going to roll your kids in eggs and dirt?
Yeah. Yes.
That was a running gag for like the first 2 or 3 years of
yeah, it was.
The show.
So, there you go.
We almost made up T-shirts with.
Yep.
Well, we've touched on the subject since then, which will come up when I talk about pairings. But it has been like a super long time, so I'm really glad we're doing this. And I think, like you said, Rob, there are several things that come up when you are attempting to analyze how you should best approach working with parents, and a few things can happen. One is I'm not sure how to properly teach parents, right? And how to ensure that they're included in a way that's meaningful for them. Another issue is I know what I want to tell parents to do, but I'm finding that for whatever reason, they're not able to do it or they aren't doing it. So we'll talk about that too. And then the other piece, and this is something I've always worried about, is are the things I'm asking parents to do actually benefiting them and the family unit as a whole? So each of these articles that we're going to discuss touches on a different piece of that. And the article that I'm going to introduce to us, so I have two I'm going to briefly review. The first one is new because it just came out, actually. So we'll talk about that. And then another one we did touch on briefly in another episode, but it's worth revisiting because I think it gives a lot of appropriate context in that when you're talking about working with families. So the Sneed and Samuelson article is new. It just came out in 2022, so it was only a year old. And this was the one where they were evaluating, or they were making comparison based on some historical data that they had access to on outcomes for both the clients and for their families when they had been receiving practitioner-led ABA versus parent-led ABA. So they were lucky, I think, to have access to like this pretty big data sample that they were pulling from. They said that it was data from a large behavioral health organization in metropolitan area of California. So that's where the data were coming from. I'm sure you can figure out looking at the article where they were from.
Yeah.
And they told us, it's really common that people get practitioner-led ABA, and that's probably the model that most listeners are familiar with. It's one in which you would have a BCBA who's overseeing maybe a BCABA or a very seasoned technician, and then they are helping to oversee newer technicians in the field. So it's kind of like a 3-tier model in which one person is there a lot of time, like many hours of the week, and the supervisor pops in and makes observations. Parents might be involved, but it's usually relatively minimal as far as the training component is concerned. So that's the model that we're all kind of used to. But then there's also a parent-led model of ABA. And here you still have a BCBA who's overseeing the case, but they're doing a lot more consultation with the family and teaching the family how they might work with their own child in order to, manage behavior in the home and or sometimes also teach new skills. So they wanted to look at those two things. They said there's a good amount of effectiveness for the parent-led ABA model, which I won't go into right now. So that wasn't really the question they were attempting to answer with this data set. They had some secondary data that they wanted to look at, which were 2 surveys that they had given these families. And it was a large family sample size. It was 152 autistic children aged 2 to 11. So all of their parents, they had data for them on 2 measures that they collected at intake and then at sort of a reassessment point 6 months later. So it was a parent self-efficacy. I love saying that word. Just so you know. Efficacy. And it was their own self-efficacy scale that they had developed, the Catalyte Parenting Self-Efficacy Scale. And this included not very many questions. I think they said it took 3 minutes to complete. So it was a pretty short survey that they did. But if you aren't sure what self-efficacy means, it's a term from Bandura, so dating us back a little bit there. And it's the idea that a person has the belief that they have the ability to be successful at a certain task, goal, activity, etc. So can you do it is not the question. Do you think you can do it is the question. And that's how you measure self-efficacy. Excuse me.
I think I can do everything, so mine would always be high.
You have high self-efficacy.
Off the chart.
To my demise.
Great. So, and it's, it's not, you're not observing whether you actually can do it. It's just like a survey. It's a survey type of response.
Like the little engine that could. You think you can.
I think I can. Yes, exactly. So there's that one. And then they also did a parent stress survey as well. So this was done on a parental stress scale, the PSS. And on this one, there was 18 items that they were measuring varying levels of parental stress. So that was the idea here is they had, like I said, a really big data sample, and just by nature of the services that the families were receiving, some of them were in the practitioner-led model and some were in the parent-led model. So they were not randomly assigned to these groups. But once they were in the groups, they said, oh, actually, we also have this other data set. And while these might not be our primary measures, these are really important measures. We want to know how do families feel they can do when they are in either the practitioner or the parent-led model, and what is their stress level, both at intake and outtake, I guess. And is there an interaction between the two? So that's all that you really need to know about this, except that I will tell you a tiny bit more about those independent variables. The practitioner-led model was about 35 hours of a paraprofessional in the home per month. And then that included 8 hours of the mid-level clinician oversight and or direct services, and then 3 hours of BCBA oversight per month. And then the parent-led model was about 2.5 to 5 hours of training and support from either that second level person or the BCBA person per week. So some of it was presented in months, some of it was presented in weeks. Don't worry about it. But those were the 2 different models. And then if you're wondering, what did the parent-led sessions look like? They included things such as teaching the parents how to work on requesting, how to utilize differential reinforcement. The parents learned about antecedents, consequences, and then their child-specific behavior plan. And then it was a lot of the BCBA working with them to figure out how to best utilize those principles and practices in the day-to-day situations that came up. So then they did a lot of statistics, which I will spare you from that.
I love statistics.
Well, you're not going to get them here from me, except to say that they looked at stress and efficacy at intake and 6 months later, right? And so for both groups, they saw ever so slight reductions in stress at the 6 month point in time, but they were nowhere near significant. And they saw slight to moderate increases in efficacy from intake to the 6-month post measure, specifically for the parent-led group. The practitioner-led group didn't really see any difference in either score. The parent-led group saw a slight but significant difference in the self-efficacy score. All right. And then they also did more fancy math, and they found that there was a negative predictive relationship between self-efficacy and stress, meaning if the parent reported a lower self-efficacy score, then they also reported having higher stress levels. So they felt that that was noteworthy. And they said the way to, so it's like a twofold thing here, right? So we want to see higher self-efficacy, so we see lower stress. The way that we saw changes in self-efficacy score was by doing this parent-led ABA model.
Yeah. And I think some of those self-efficacy kind of correlations to stress level, those have been identified in prior research.
Yeah.
I think the findings here, the most interesting takeaway is the self-efficacy only really significantly improved in terms of increase in self-efficacy for the parent-led group, pointing to the potential, I don't want to say danger, but you certainly you may be missing a benefit when you're doing practitioner-led versus parent-led. Though again, they didn't look at a lot of other factors, like how quickly were children, acquiring new skills, which could also lead to, certainly, challenging behavior also being correlated to higher stress. Well, yes. A parent might have a hard time with implementing some more intensive interbehavioral interventions, so that could be a factor, and only the practitioner-led group might be able to affect that change in those early go. So there are a lot of other factors too. So it's not as cut and dry as just, well, then we should only do parent-led, and that's all there is to it, because that's where self-efficacy comes from. Because we didn't even see the decrease in stress in this one study. A lot of reasons for that too. It didn't go very long. It only did the 6-month follow-up. So maybe the stress change comes later. Could have been issues with procedural integrity. A lot of other things can factor in. But definitely important for looking at ways to include parents to increase their self-efficacy.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do something when you think you can do it versus when you don't.
Mm-hmm. And as we'll talk about some of our other studies, there are other benefits beyond just feelings of self-efficacy that can come by having parents as one of the practitioners in our kind of co-developed treatment plans.
But wait,
there's more. Rob. That was good.
Thank you.
All right. And now, like I said, I'm just going to hopefully briefly summarize the Allen and Warzak 2000 study. This is an oldie but a goodie. I really do like this article quite a lot.
You love this article.
In almost every way. But the way that I don't really like this article is the title. I know I've said this before.
Well,
because it's called The Problem. Right, we're starting out negative. The problem of parental non-adherence. That sounds kind of judgy, to be honest with you. But now the whole rest of the paper is all about, look at all of these additional factors that need to be taken into consideration when we are working with parents in the home. And there are like 1,000 reasons why parents might not be doing what you are specifically asking them to do, right? So the whole article is about, let's think about this in context, folks. Just because you come in and say, something that, I need your 100% treatment integrity in order to run this type of program. Just because you come in and say that as a clinician, that by no means means that that's a feasible request on the part of the parents. So the article to me has a whole different tone than the title does, but they really quickly, they tell us, like, if you want to use these behavioral strategies, they need to be implemented with, high fidelity. And then from there, like, they say that, and then they like break it down and say, these are all the reasons why that might be particularly challenging, and a lot of contextual variables need to be taken into consideration when you are working with parents and asking them to do certain things. So I think this article is great, and I will have to move quickly through it here. But they tell us that there are 4 areas that we as clinicians should be thinking about in the home when we are working with parents and asking them to implement any type of behavioral approach. And those 4 areas are consideration of EOs, stimulus generalization, response acquisition, and consequent events. So in any of those particular places, there could be kind of a breakdown in what parents are really feasibly able to do for a number of reasons. So if we're thinking about EOs, we should be definitely considering what are those establishing operations that are coming into play that are going to change the value of varying reinforcers available in the home. It could be that some of those intermediate outcomes that we are attempting to establish as reinforcers really can't function as reinforcers because of the various complexities of the environment in which we're working. They say maybe we could set some intermediate goals as reinforcers so that we aren't working on basically like too thin a schedule and not being able to, those long-term reinforcers work in the way that we want them to. They also say that underneath this category, failing to establish social approval as a reinforcer could be a reason why we're not seeing that same type of success here. And as we know, if we're not seeing success, then parents are unlikely to continue down that particular behavioral path, right? Because you're putting in a lot of effort and not really getting the reward that you were expecting to from it. So taking into consideration what the social approval pieces are that parents may be encountering in like the natural environment or the communities in which they live is a big piece to think about here. Underneath stimulus generalization, they talk about the challenges with attempting to train within the home setting. There might be insufficient exemplars available in those settings, or if, a child was trained at school with one set of stimuli, then at home it might be different. So that narrow range of setting stimuli could have an effect here on sort of stimulus control and generalization in the home. They say there could be weak rule-following behavior, and that could also have an effect on everyone's adherence to the rules at home. One culprit of this could certainly be that we're using technical language and making things a lot more difficult for parents by not approaching this in the most, fluid and easy to follow way. So that's something that could be changed. In the area of response acquisition, we may be asking parents to do something that's much more complex. So the complexity of the skill is too much. And we can change that by breaking skills down, varying the instructional techniques that we're using with parents. So using more BST, maybe doing modeling, etc. We can also think about the teaching environment that we are asking parents and their children to be working in. It could be there are a lot of competing stimuli in that environment, for example. And then underneath the area of consequent events, they make a point that we really are often asking people to kind of work against their natural instinct, particularly if we're thinking about short-term versus longer-term consequences. So like addressing that and recognizing that up front is important so that we can talk to parents about that and also recognize one of those pieces maybe coming into play. So rather than saying like, oh, why is this parent not doing what I'm asking them to do, right? Which is a short-sighted way of thinking about entering into this relationship with a family. Rather than taking that approach, we should be thinking like, well, what are probably some of the short-term consequences that may be maintaining this family's behavior? And while I can see the benefit now, let's try to talk about what the long-term benefit would be of taking another approach that's going to end up providing them with better long-term reinforcers down the road.
Yeah. And some of the ideas that they propose here are great. Use BST, right? Some of them I didn't like as much. I know there's one on looking at, can we use like a swear jar kind of style plan where the parents are they're gonna put some money in and they get the money back if they engage in the training, and that feels a little much. It feels a little too contrived in a way I think a parent might feel condescended to.
Yes, I agree.
Versus say, hey, have you made sure to build that rapport? Have you made sure to look at your language? Did you do a component analysis? As some of our studies that we'll talk about today look at, have you actually run your treatment and know it is effective? Or are you sort of dumping it all on the parent? And I think there's a big difference between running the treatment to mastery for the client and then saying, all right, parents, now we'll bring you in. Now that it's now that the problem is smaller, we'll bring you in. Sometimes you can do that, but sometimes you can't. So I think really as you're planning your treatment, could you do briefer assessments of the treatment to sort of figure out what do you need? What can you ditch to make the treatment a little easier to decrease some of that response effort? So really, what can we do on our end so that when it is time to train the parent, we are very focused. They already have seen some of those successes, and then they can just engage in the pieces that are required, that are hopefully in line with their own values. And we've done all the legwork to make sure that's the case. You know, we haven't just done the FA, done the treatment, and then said, all right, do you like this treatment? What do you think? If you don't, I don't care, because we know it's effective, which I think it's easier to fall into that trap when you're not including the parent from moment one of your case conceptualization of just, well, I did the thing and my data show this function. Therefore, here's the treatment I learned in grad school. And look, here's the data to show this is an effective treatment. So I think it's much harder to convince ourselves. Of the importance of parents when we've done all that work. Because you've done a lot of work. You know, I don't want to knock BCBAs when they do all this great work and they just kind of forgot to include the parent, you know, maybe with legit reasons. The parent wasn't available. It was an emergency situation, right? But at some point, if you're not including them, you might find yourself with the best treatment that ever existed that no one else wants to run or will run, which means your treatment's worthless.
Right. Or the kids learn it with you, but then they go home and don't do the skill where it's actually needed. Mm-hmm. Right? Because if you're not including parents.
And some of that we can take on ourselves if we want to, in terms of looking at multiple exemplars, ensuring the right reinforcers are available to improve, you know, the generality of the treatment. But a lot of times the best way to ensure a level of generality is going to be including the multiple caregivers, including multiple people in the implementation of the treatment.
Yeah. It's always been kind of surprising to me that that's not a larger component, generally speaking, of our intervention plans, because I think that it's an absolutely critical piece here, that our job is not done unless the family, which is an extension of our client, feels, you know, socially significant effects of the behavior change. So if they're not seeing that in the home, then we really haven't, you know, finished what we set out to do. And the best way to ensure that we're going to see those effects at home is if we establish the right conditions under which the naturally occurring contingencies in the home are going to maintain the behavior change. And that's going to 100% involve working with the parent. So this article, like, you know, when you read it, you're like, oh yeah, like, of course. And maybe you would come to a lot of these conclusions on your own, and maybe you already have, which is great. But it lays it out in such a way that if you hadn't thought about these things, it gives you a chance to read about them all in one place. And at one point it says, like, parents are organisms too, right? All of us, all of our behavior is going to, you know, move toward reinforcement, and our behavior does that, and parents and our, you know, students or our learners too, all of us. So if you're seeing that parents are behaving in a different way than you were expecting, then you just got to follow the reinforcers and identify where those are and work together with the family to see, you know, what are their values and how can I ensure that we're going to reach those together. And so it's, you know, it's part communication and it's part analysis of behavior on our part of what that home environment looks like, so that we can ultimately get the best outcome for the family. So aside from the title, I love this article, and it brings up some really great points. So go back and check it out if you have not before.
All right. So we know that there's a level of need for effective parent training. We know that there are benefits that go beyond just, hey, the treatment gets to occur in a place other than my clinic room. There's the increase in self-efficacy. But we know that just, you know, telling parents, here's the great treatment that I did the work on, and here's an article telling you that if you follow these treatment recommendations and do it yourself, your self-efficacy will increase, and over time your stress should decrease, which is nice, and I'm sure parents totally believe, but is not the same as then being able to engage with the treatment. And, you know, let's take a little break before we come back and talk a little bit about two ways that we might be able to put some of Alan and Karzik's recommendations into more direct practice.
Warzak.
What did I say?
Warzik.
I'm thinking, yeah. They sound like 80s arcade games. Sorry.
They do.
Warzak. Actually, that also sounds like an 80s arcade game. All right, well, we play a game of Warzak. You all take a break, and then we'll be right back.
Don't you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to ABA Inside Track. But did you also know that we are ACE and QABA approved and that by listening, you're able to earn 1 learning credit? Well, if not, now you do. All you need to do is finish listening and then go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, or click the link in our show note description on your podcast player to go directly to the page where you can get a CE. All you need to do is finish listening, go to that website, and enter in some information, including 2 secret code words. We're going to give you the first one here. It is woolly, W-O-O-L-Y. Woolly, something that has a lot of wool. It could be clothing. It could be describing a sheep, and especially woolly sheep.
2 L's is also fine.
2 L's. How do you spell woolly, Diana? You don't like my spelling?
I don't know.
I think it's W-O-O-L-Y. If you spell it W-O-L-L-Y, either way, you're good. 2 L's, 1 L. Just get the W, the double O's, and the Y, and you're good.
Apparently, Rob, we've had a few episodes where we spelled the word wrong, and people...
What?
I can't tell you.
You can't say that. You'll tell me later. Okay.
People email and be like, do you need me to spell it the wrong way? Like, no. Whichever way is fine.
You know, we try so hard. All right.
I'll accept both.
Okay. But in this case, woolly.
Woolly.
And we are back talking about some parent training updates. So before the break, we talked about the importance of parent training. We kind of reiterated that point. We talked about some possible barriers to effective parent training. And now for the second half of the show, we're going to talk about 2 articles that really dive deep into some more specifics of how to include more effective components in your parent training.
That's what everyone's been clamoring for.
More effective components?
Because you're like, parent training's good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I already know, right? I know I should be doing that. But how?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us.
All right. Well, we've got 2 ways. So I'm going to start us off by talking about Kupsik and Lebrot's article called Teaching Future School Personnel to Train Parents to Implement Explicit Instruction Interventions, which I am a little annoyed at the title, as I think it promises a little more than it delivers. It delivers a very fabulous model, and it delivers some really cool parent training components. I think the area that I wanted more in was more of the specific teaching the future school personnel. But lucky for us, the episode's about teaching parents, so we can kind of sidestep some of the pieces I wish were in the article for the personnel, because we care about the parents here. So I'll go over a little bit of that beef later on. So specifically here, we're looking at academic intervention. Now, when you look at statistics, so if you look at, say, like the National Assessment of Educational Progress from 2020, you'll find that at least here in the U.S., less than 1/4 of children are proficient with reading, writing, and math. And that's not just students with disabilities. That's all students. So when we are talking about our students who do have disabilities, we expect that number to possibly decrease even lower in terms of their proficiency. And there's a real need to use evidence-based instruction to improve the learning outcomes of almost all students, but certainly our students with disabilities. And we certainly know that when you have more collaboration between professionals and the parents in terms of treatment, then you often see better outcomes. We've talked about a lot of those. Certainly we talked about self-efficacy, but also talking about skill areas like, how do we improve the generalization of a treatment? How do we accelerate the progress through a higher dosage of treatment? So when we talk about academics specifically, Usually you see a little bit more data in terms of parent tutoring in areas having a really large effect at student academic success. But when we're talking about students who are already struggling to learn and parents who are likely not professional special education teachers themselves, it's not going to be enough to just say, same problem as with any behavioral treatment, right? Here are some flashcards, or here's some things you should practice with your child at home, because they may not have the prerequisite skills to engage in that learning. They may engage in problem behavior due to learning history around the challenge of that learning, making it less likely that parents will continue to engage in whatever has been recommended. So it's really, I think, disingenuous sometimes to just throw stuff at parents and be like, you can do these things with your kids. There's some great ones like reading to your child. That's always a good one. But even that might have a weird learning history, depending on how parents read to their child. Do they read to their child as this is a school activity versus this is a fun, snuggly activity that we all enjoy? As children get older, they may be less interested in doing some of those recommended activities. So a lot of barriers can fall and make it hard for parents to engage.
Not everyone likes reading books, too.
That's true. Not everyone likes reading books. So especially when we then add to the mix the fact that many of the students that need the most practice already have other disabilities, or they're at risk with their academics. They may have limited English proficiency, which means the parents might also are likely to have limited English proficiency, learning disabilities. So a lot of things can really act against a parent's favor in terms of being able to take this, relatively straightforward recommendation and then do anything with it. So how can we help our parents? And certainly one of the ways is by using better curricular methods. And one of them, which it seems to be everywhere. I don't know if it's just I'm noticing it more, or whether everyone is just getting hot on the idea of more explicit instruction as a topic, but I'm seeing it everywhere these days, which is great because it is sort of it's similar to, say, direct instruction. A topic that someday we'll do on the show, but nobody ever votes for it in our polls. So we've been
nobody wants to do it, Rob. Everyone now is doing it out of spite. People actually do want to do it, but they're like, you know what? Rob really wants to do it, so we're just going to pretend that we're not doing it.
Well, we'll do a little bit of it light here. But so specifically talking about explicit instruction, I think explicit instruction lends itself really well to giving parents an activity they can engage with, because it focuses on very clear sequences of instruction. It has very definite outcomes. It has a lot of evidence to support its usage in improving skills of children. And it follows a very kind of structured and scaffolded instruction pattern that should be easier for parents to be able to follow, because it takes care of some of the complexities of other academic instructional methodologies. So, and it's very bite-sized too. It's meant to be done in small chunks. So it's very hard to tell a parent, well, you could do 1 to 2 hours of vocab prep versus if you just try to do 3 to 5 times a week, this very targeted 10 to 15 minute intervention of vocabulary, you're going to get higher treatment adherence most likely. So what can we do to help parents with this? And, again, there are a lot of things that should go into parent tutoring. Like, what should a parent tutoring session look like? You need to make sure that the parents are engaged in tutoring that is at the instructional level of their child, so that the child does not say, I hate this, and engage in problem behavior to avoid or escape from the tutoring. You need to have a sequence of skills that the parents can easily follow. It needs to have explicit instructions, again, to help parents with a skill that they don't naturally know how to do. And you need to help them work on what are the strategies that are related to higher engagement. So again, how do you make the activity more fun for the child? Are there more opportunities or enough opportunities for the child to respond? Are you able to give them feedback, which is going to be important for maintaining the child's adherence to the plan as well as to learn effectively? And my favorite, I put it in quotes because I wish I'd come up with this alliteration, teaching parents to use a perky pace of their instruction. And then also things like, how do you monitor basic performance? And then how are you supporting the parents long term? So in terms of the part 1, the professionals get all that information ready for the parents, and the part 2, teaching the parents to engage in explicit instruction activities, I think this article does a great job. The part 3 of, and now everyone can do it, I'm a little not sold on. However, we'll talk in Dissemination Station about some ideas that I don't remember if they came from the article. I think they're my own. At least I wrote them in the notes as my own ideas, but who remembers at this point? So what this article really does nicely is lay out a very nice model of what this could look like. I'm going to skim through the first couple phases because a lot of them are very specific to the professional, not necessarily to the professional plus the parent. So the 4 phases when faced with academic achievement challenges for a student, for a child, are identify what the problem is, analyze the problem, implement a plan, and then evaluate the plan. And the parents are included in various components of this, which I think is nice in terms of how do we include parents, holistically in our planning. But realistically, it's mostly the sort of the plan implementation piece where they're getting parent training. The rest of it is more the inclusion of the parent in the overall discussion of the problem. So you get together with a family. My child's having trouble learning a skill, academic skill, whatever it might be. So you start by doing some of the interview skills in which you're making your warm and supportive relationship, because you should always be thinking about how do I include the parent and make them feel like I am somebody who cares about their input, who cares about their child, and who cares about their family as a whole, rather than as somebody who is just trying to give them an answer and then get them out of my office as quickly as possible. Identifying the problem is mostly going to be up to the professional, but it does include a lot of activities where you can continue to build that rapport, such as interviews with the parent, interviews with the students, possibly even with teachers, to sort of talk about what is the issue, where are their challenges. Certainly some of this you could do separately. We'll get into, you could do a lot of direct assessments, which you're going to have to do anyway. So there's that question of, do I even need some of these components? And the answer is, well, yes, because as much as a direct assessment might tell you, here is the level, the grade level, the developmental level that the child is on. Are they at kind of an acquisition stage where the learning will be kind of slow with errors? Are they at a fluency stage where they need more prompts, but they're starting to respond more independently? Are they looking at more maintenance type skills, right? Where the responses should be quick. But what you need to be looking at is the whole piece of, where might the challenges for this child be? Is it all skill-based, or are there components that are going to be more about their motivation to engage in whatever the eventual intervention is? So, you're going to have your current performance, you're going to do your direct kind of curriculum-based measurement systems. Maybe you'll do some kind of standardized diagnostic academics. Parents aren't doing that. You're going to do that as a professional. You're going to do that with another professional, right? If you're not a BCBA who has a background in educational testing. But what you do want to be talking with the parent about are, and this comes into the problem analysis piece of, all right, where is the problem occurring? So in your interview, are you asking questions about, when did you notice this problem? Does this problem happen in home or only at school? What does the homework procedure look like? And ideally, some of this information the parent knows, and the teacher, if you're able to talk with the teacher, also knows, because they've already talked with the parents about this problem. That's ideal. And certainly as future school personnel, if you haven't been talking with parents from day one about where do you see problems occurring in terms of learning at home, you really should have, because you don't want to be throwing things at parents as any sort of professional when you don't have an idea about, is this going to be perceived as the one more thing, and the lack of acknowledgement of how much a parent needs to do in a day by just, you should do this. Because I think that inherently implies then if you're not, you're a bad parent, or you're not supporting your child, which is not a fair assessment, nor do I think it is the goal of some of those here to do these things.
Allen and Warzak. Right.
But it can happen. It can happen very easily without anyone meaning to, but it still can result in damaging that relationship. Yeah. All right. So we know where the problems are occurring. We have a sense of the history. We've done the assessments, right? So technically, as the professional, here's where the child would need to have intervention. But the next step you're going to do, and this really goes into the Allen and Warzak piece, is the problem analysis, which is where you as a professional test the effectiveness of whichever academic intervention you're going to suggest. So it's going to be some sort of explicit instruction, meaning it's going to be very scaffolded. It's going to have very small chunks that can be done in small pieces. But you also want to be looking at things such as, and you can do this in kind of a quick kind of experimental analysis of, if I pick this treatment or that treatment, if I include reinforcement, a tangible reinforcer at the end, or if I don't, if I include rules, if I add more time or less time, right? You can play around with some of those components in a very brief alternating treatments design. And again, with acquisition, I know when we talk about research, we're always talking about how hard it is to do alternating treatment design because the child is probably always learning something, but you may be looking at other factors such as social validity of the participant. I like this one versus that one, if the child is able to engage in that type of sort of, their own analysis, right? Or monitoring. But you might look at other things, their overall affect during the activity. You could certainly look at, how many right versus how many wrong when I do these different treatments. But this is a great way to really get down to this is the treatment. These are the pieces that are most important, and I have data to support them. Therefore, now I know exactly what I will need to train the parent on when transitioning the treatment to the home setting. So again, is it the concise instructions, the opportunities to respond, right? All of that should be in there, but is there, one piece versus the other that's more or less important? And again, once you're done with this, you can take that information to put it into a 10 to 20 minute intervention. Nice, simple, straightforward, somewhat scripted. And this also lets you know whether this is an academic problem solely or also is potentially related to a performance deficit. So the child could do the skill, they don't want to do the skill, or it is hard for them to do the skill, and therefore it is aversive in a way that no academic test is going to tell you on its own. So this article also, if you're interested, has a huge table of different interventions and treatments that can be used based on the results of those interventions. So this is just a nice little resource that you can use as well as the book Archer and Hughes on Explicit Instruction. If you haven't read it, which I have not and I need to, really gives you a lot of this information. But again, we're talking about the parent training. That's what's key here. So here comes our plan implementation. And this is where we have all the information to put together the best, easiest, most effective treatment ever for the maths deficit, the reading deficit, the writing deficit, whatever it is. And here's where behavior skills training comes into play. So some key things to remember is, since you already spent all this time, you should have a very easy script for parents to follow in terms of the intervention, which means now you take it, go through it again, sand down the terms that might be too jargony, and focus on the easy to understand language. Make sure your data system is very easy. Simple log. When did you do the treatment and how long? And, maybe you have a procedural integrity checklist, but maybe you don't even, you give that to the parents just as their own checklist if they want to self-monitor or not, right? And then you work on the training component. And the training component, again, it's not super surprising with BST. First, you describe the results of the overall assessment in this case, because I think this is helpful. And you would do this with any assessment. Why did I do this assessment? What does this tell us, right? The rationale of the treatment components that you are proposing, the parent puts into place, so they have their chance to give feedback. And then once that is settled, all right, behavior skills training to teach the steps in the protocol. They have been able to get it down in this study. They say it should take about 50 minutes. Your mileage is going to vary depending on how familiar you are with the steps of behavior skills treatment. But number one is you have the written list of skills to be completed by the parent. You model them after you've given the rationale. You allow the parent to try it in a role play scenario. You give them feedback. What did they do correctly? What do they need to work on again? And you continue to repeat this until you reach a mastery criterion, whatever you think is appropriate for the treatment you're recommending. With academics, you may be able to go a little lower than, say, 100%, because again, if they make small mistakes, it may or may not be that important to the overall treatment. They recommend here, especially, the key components are going to be a lot of the reinforcement for the effort of the child and the engagement. So, again, in a pinch, focus on engagement, focus on making sure the parents are reinforcing effort, not just reinforcing success, which can be very hard for a lot of people to do. Ideally, you'll practice in the environment where the parent will most likely implement instruction. So this might be a great time to do some distance training, or maybe if you could do training in the home setting itself. But at the very least, you want to make sure they're in a setting that's similar. So a table, a chair, and have all the materials that are needed. Then leave time for questions at the end, because parents will have questions. They should have questions. And then the next part is a little different than sort of our standard BST, in that you just kind of set some initial goals. With academics, it's like, can you do this 3 to 5 times a week? And you can modify it based on parent ability to follow a schedule like that. And then what is your plan for follow-up? And this is another area where I think parent training might be missed, because BST, we always think of BST as like, and then it works, it's amazing. But we have to remember that it is pretty amazing, but there is still going to need to be some follow-up, not least of which because you are talking about academic goals, which will hopefully be met relatively swiftly to start, dealing with that initial, Alan Warzik problem of sometimes the reinforcers of the child's success don't come quickly enough. Ideally, in explicit instruction, they do. So, we talked a little bit about it with precision teaching. Right? You should see that improvement pretty quickly. So you need to make sure that you work with the parents to set up a SMART goal. Teachers, you all know what your SMART goals are, but it's an acronym for specific, measurable, a goal with action words, a realistic and relevant goal, and it has to have a time limit. So this is how you're going to measure progress. So include the parents in the writing and the setting of that SMART goal. And then set up what's your schedule. When will you be following up with the parent? Will it be over Zoom? Will you be having them come back to your clinic to do procedural integrity checks? Are the parents interested in doing some self-monitoring? Maybe you want to save that till later. Is this weekly? Is this bi-weekly? Right? When are you checking in with them both to look at academic achievement of this child, but also to look at their implementation logs to make sure that the skill is being carried out? And how are you aware of whether procedural integrity is still high? And again, include the parents in this so it's not a surprise. I need videos of you. I didn't tell you this when you left, but I want you to send me a video of you running this. Include that in your follow-up so the parents know that this is going to happen. They understand why that might be important. Maybe they'd rather come back to the clinic than take videos of themselves. Some people get very self-conscious with videos, less so when they're in like a clinic setting. So they may rather just run the treatment the next time they come visit you or they come work with you to sort of do maybe an academic check-in with the student themselves. And then you continue to monitor the data for improvement and repeat until all of the goals that were initially set are met. And then this study sets up a really nice case example of this is exactly what it would look like, which is always nice because it's really easy to talk about the general points. And then there are always questions of, if I had a student like this, what would I do? So again, I think the case example is just one more kind of exemplar that you can look at as you're thinking about these pieces. So we'll talk about sort of the lack of and how the future school personnel could do all of this. But again, the key components, I think, come back to some good practice of do your work, including the parent as early as possible to make sure that when you are recommending the treatment, it is straightforward and likely to be effective as possible. And then include your behavior skills training and then include that monitoring piece afterwards, which I think is really, really important. How will you do the monitoring going forward to ensure a high level of procedural integrity in a way that also the parents feel is helpful rather than intrusive? So that's one skill, but not everyone wants to work on academic skills. Sometimes parents want to work on maybe something like social skills.
Take it away, Jackie. So one thing I want to say about this article, and it's not like a dig at the authors, it's a dig at the field in general. We say like teach social skills. So I did it too. I'm not blaming the authors because I did observational learning to teach social skills, right? Like to teach skills, social skills. But then I feel like for like the new reader, you're like, I'm going to learn how to teach them everything. Mm-hmm. When really you're just teaching them 1 or 2 or 3 skills that are part of social skills. I don't know. While I was reading the article, I just wish the articles would just say the skills they're teaching in the title instead of social skills. What do you guys think on that?
I think we did a whole episode on sort of social skills training manuals specifically because I think one of the big challenges with social skills is anyone who is able to break down a skill and has sort of a basic understanding of the context in which the social skill occurs can probably train a social skill if they get creative. But at the end of the day, no one is looking to train a social skills. They're looking to train social skills.
Right? Yeah.
All caps.
So that's always hard for me.
And some are more important than others, right? Some social skills are really critical for any type of interaction in this world, and some really are not, and are sort of artifacts of a social system that we've created that might not really be that meaningful. So sometimes I know people too may have kind of a big reaction to social skills, and if they knew what was being taught, they could more easily discern if they felt it was a meaningful task or not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. So that was just while I was reading this.
Yeah, that's not these authors.
No, it's not at all. No.
Can I say one funny thing is that in our drive, this article was called Dogan et al., but it was all written as one word. And so, Rob, you were texting. You're like, who's gonna do the Doganatol article? Like, that was the guy's name.
Hilariously, though, I looked like 5 different times. I'm like, this one says Dogan et al. Where's the Donanicol?
Right, who's Donanicol?
I can't find it.
Why can't articles, when we download them from the internet, just have a consistent file naming structure?
It's okay.
They don't do that. Sometimes some journals do actually like have a convention already set up for when you download it, but others don't.
And so, then they have it and it works for a bit. But then if you go to the old articles, it's some old one, and then you set up your own naming system. I don't know. That's
yeah,
we need.
But
we need
anyway,
Doganatol, let's hear it.
So for this article, I do want to say you can totally tell that this is a dissertation because everything is so thoughtfully planned out down to the T, which is hilarious in a way because in the limitations, they were like, maybe we didn't have to plan this out so well, right? Like that is a limitation that we planned it out
We're
so well.
too good.
And I
also
see
my weakness, just too good sometimes.
Right? I'm just too amazing. But they make the fact that we just made the social skills are hard to teach. There isn't just one skill. And so what they're looking at mostly is using behavioral skills training, right? Because we know BST is the best, to teach parents how to train skills. And so this study was less about the skill that they were teaching and more about teaching the parents to train the skill, and then did the kids get it, and then what happened next.
Yeah.
So I think that's important because I don't think the title actually captures what they're really focusing on parent training, even though that's what it says, parent training, right? But when you say to teach social skills, you think, okay, let's talk about the kids. And they do talk about the kids, but that's like a secondary measure. The primary measure is, can we use BST to teach parent training?
Yeah, at times it was more about the teaching parents how to...
Oh, that's what it was. That was what they were doing.
It's almost multiple exemplar training, like teaching parents how to design, more kind of evocative situations across...
Well, they didn't even have to do it because, right, the PI did everything for them.
Yeah.
Right? So the PI did everything for them. But I think when you're going to read this, it's less about social skills and more about training parents to use BST. And surprise, surprise, BST is the best. But not as best as you'd think it would be. So let's talk about that. So they're replicating a previous article by Stewart et al. And this was the first study that was ever published in JABA, or, in our field, to gather parent and child data using BST. And there were several limitations in that previous study. Since they used an A/B design, they didn't have anything operationally defined as well as they needed to. So this study the primary purpose was to replicate and extend that Stewart in 2007 study by addressing some of the various limitations, such as now including a multiple baseline design, defining specific skills for the parents and children to do. And so that was like their overarching purpose. But then they had like kind of secondary purposes and so they wanted to assess the effectiveness of using BST to train parents. But then they also wanted to, look at once we've trained you to teach one skill, can you then maintain that skill? And then can you also generalize that skill to untrained skills? Right? And so one thing that I thought coming into this study, I really thought that they were going to talk about the social skills more, but they don't actually even tell us what the social skills are until kind of a long time in. And it's like, what are you actually teaching? Because it didn't matter, right? I mean, it did, but it was less important. So I thought that was kind of funny. So you have to get there. It takes a while to get in to know the social skills that you're actually teaching.
Yeah.
And there's really only one that they're teaching. It's joining a conversation. And then the other skills that they are looking for are novel skills that they're untaught. So that was a little hard to pull out. But there were 4 child and parent dyads, and boy, did they give us information about these child-parent dyads.
So much detail.
So much detail, right? They had for the parents, they said they're all moms, 37 to 47, 3 were married, 1 was separated. They gave the educational background. They gave the income.
Yeah. Medical history of the parent.
Job. Yeah, I was like, whew. They went into it. And so the children had an IQ of 70 or greater. When I see that, I always want to highlight that, right? Because then it might test the limits of generality on who might best benefit from this type of program, right? Because IQ of 70 or greater. And then another criteria was that they participated in at least 1 gen ed class, which also, right, is like a star here, like, okay, who would benefit from this? If you are not in a gen ed class, would you then benefit? If you weren't, if your IQ was like way lower than 70, would this be helpful? So I think, right, thinking about that is important if you were going to try to replicate this.
Yeah.
All the students had an ASD or a related diagnosis. And then they also, I like that they had this, and they did a pre-assessment compliance check. They're like, okay, we're not gonna F around with these kids. We want to make sure that they're gonna work with us. And so they had a pre-treatment compliance check where they looked at simple instructions. They did an interview with the child, with the parents. They did direct observation, and you had to score 70% or higher on the pre-assessment compliance check in order to be included in the study.
Yeah. Which is also important in thinking about replicability.
Right. Right. So if you scored less than that, then you maybe this type of treatment package might not
for a different study.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they did say that some of the children participated in ABA therapy, but the parents had no formal training with ABA. They were asked to complete 2 rating scales to assess common childhood problems and ASD symptoms. If you want to know those, you can look at the article, but it's not really relevant here. But what was relevant is that all the kids scored above average on the problem behavior subscales and below average on the social skills scales for those. So it's cool that the sessions took place at their own home. So that's kind of nice. It wasn't like school. They're really trying to, expand the applicability of the studies. And social skills typically, the parents are training, they're typically happening at home in novel settings. They were recorded. They gave you specifically what video camera they used. I love it when they do that. They're like, if you want to use the video camera I did,
you're going to need to go back in time.
I just love that. They're like, 500. I just love it when people use that. They get to that level. And so sessions lasted between 20 minutes to 120 minutes, with the 120 minutes being the training sessions and the lower ones being the maintenance sessions and the generalization sessions. So they made a BST handout that parents had access to throughout the entire study. They gave that in the appendix. I put that in our folder. And it's literally just laying out the steps of BST. But I do love myself a good appendix. When I see them, like, ooh, supporting material. And I get very excited. I went right to the website and picked it up. And one other thing I love in the materials is that they include a puppet. This is kind of buried in a little bit because they only mention it twice, but man, I want to see what the puppet looked like. They had a puppet that acted as a conversational partner because you wanted to join in a conversation and they didn't have enough people. So one of the people was a puppet.
It reminded me of the time we did a preview video, back when we did preview videos.
Right, with that puppet?
With a puppet.
Yeah. That was for episode 53, Empathy.
Yeah, that was awesome. And so I just love that they added that in there. I was like, oh, really? How's that going to work? But then they explained it and it makes sense, but it's just kind of cute. I wonder, was it like a Muppet puppet? What kind of puppet was it? But it doesn't matter. They don't probably have to include that, but that was just me dreaming about what the sessions looked like. So they had some primary dependent variables and some secondary dependent variables. And like I alluded to before, the primary dependent variable was the percent of BS steps correct. So this is where it is interesting. So they had a very lengthy TA for that. It was 15 steps, but they cared about the 15 steps, but they really cared about only 5 of those steps. And so that's one of the limitations, right? So they calculated the 15 steps percentage correct, but they also calculated the 5 steps percentage correct because that's what professionals have said. This is what you really need to do BST, but then they kind of added some, which was a limitation of the study. They're like, maybe we went a little too overboard.
Right, yeah.
Because they're like, maybe we don't need all of these things, but I kind of liked that they were like, we really went for it, but maybe we didn't have to. So that was a little bit confusing, but then when I understood it, that was okay. So then the 5 important steps were ones that you wouldn't be surprised about, right? Like providing a rationale, stating the steps, providing an opportunity for modeling, providing an opportunity for the child for role plays, and immediate feedback. Not surprised there, right? Those are the BST steps.
Exactly.
Right. So I'm not surprised there. The other ones are maybe you did them, maybe you didn't. It's like praise, that sort of thing.
Review.
Yeah. So those they had them in there, but they weren't like extra important. And then the secondary measures were the child percentages of correct steps of the actual social skills TA. So like, did they join the conversation? And usually the steps that they had between were 4 to 6 steps for all of the skills. And then they also did a treatment evaluation inventory short form to assess the social validity of the study. They used a non-concurrent multiple baseline design across participants, and they conducted multiple trials within each sessions, usually around 2 to 7 trials per session, and it depended on what skill they were looking at. And sessions usually lasted no more than 10 minutes, but they had multiple sessions in a day. And the parents were either practicing with the graduate student being the child, the primary investigator being the child, or the child being the child. And so they made a ton, right? So it was like a different, like in the role play and modeling, the child wouldn't be there, right? But the child would come later on once the parents had mastered.
Right, but they never had the child pretend to be the parent and the parent.
No.
That'd be too confusing.
That was too confusing there. They provided a lot of vignettes. I would have loved to see these vignettes. I didn't see them in the supporting documents, but they give you an example in the article as one of them, but I would have loved to see, because they had quite a few. So they provided these opportunities, and it was from a book called The SCORE Skills, Social Skills for Cooperative Groups. And so maybe I just have to buy that book, right? Yeah. I didn't either. And so they had joining a conversation had 25 steps, and asking for help or other related skill that the parent chose for the novel skill that they were going to teach were 5 steps. So it's important that the vignettes for baseline, post-training, booster sessions, and maintenance were all novel, but during the training sessions, they used vignettes multiple times.
Okay.
Cool. So the first thing that they did is they taught the parent what BST was, and then trained it across 1 to 3 sessions in the home, right? So during baseline, parents were asked to demonstrate how they would teach that skill. They were given the targeted list of steps, so 25 steps for that joining a conversation. And if they missed any part of it, the primary investigator would jump in, provide that opportunity so they could move forward, right? So for an instance, if they missed the role play, the primary investigator would jump in and then provide that opportunity. Or if the parent just read it, then they contrive the opportunity for the child to join the conversation by like leading the parent to another place where they'd all sit down and talk about something.
It's a less stringent way to do a probe for a task analysis behavior change.
Right. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Because you want to really make sure that they can't do the skill. So during training, each parent was taught how to use BST to teach without the child present. So they were explaining what BST was. They gave their handout, which you can get in the supplementary information, and encouraged to use praise or preferred item. But they were like, that's not the most important. What the most important is, right, is structured modeling. And during modeling, the PI and the 2 graduate students and the puppet, don't forget the puppet, modeled the correct BST steps for a vignette. And then so once they did that, then the PI modeled all the BST steps with the parent as the child, and then included feedback here. So positive and corrective feedback for the child, right? Because the parent will eventually have to do that. And then during role play, the PI and the parent switched roles, and they again used novel vignettes from the training, and data here were taken on the correct implementation of BST steps. And so following that role play, parents receive feedback similar to what they would receive what the child would receive in the modeling condition. And the training sessions were considered mastered if they were above 80% across 3 novel vignettes. They demonstrated the use of those 5 required steps. And during maintenance, they scored 80% or better. If not, they got a booster session. And the booster session consisted of 2 additional opportunities to role play with the instructor that did not include instructions and modeling. So it was just like, let's practice a little bit more this role play and feedback part, which we know is the most important. And so then after that, they did maintenance only if there was more than 1 day had elapsed between the training or the post-training sessions or the post-training parent-child interactions. So 2 parents had to go through maintenance, and they had to role play with the instructor as the child with 2 novel vignettes. If they still couldn't quite get it after that parent-child interaction, they implemented a self-monitoring procedure if they failed during the booster session, where they had to check off on the sheet each thing that they did. Seems kind of punitive, but I understand, like, that's what I would do too if you couldn't get it. And so then they did the post-training parent-child interaction. So they used the BST handout. They had the social skills handout with the steps. They had a novel vignette that they used with their child to teach their child how to join a conversation. And in order for this to be successful, the child had to meet 80% criteria to pass. If the parents didn't pass with an 80% of doing all of the steps, then they received that self-monitoring checklist and at least 3 additional trials. If the child didn't meet mastery, which did happen, they had at least 2 additional trials to see what happened. And then, there's a lot, right? They're doing a lot here.
Yeah.
And so then in generalization, the parents were asked to choose another skill out of that book. They were given the BST handout again. They had the social skill that they've chose with the specific steps that were between 4 and 5 steps, I guess. And those included correcting another person, waiting your turn, and interrupting appropriately. And they took probe data on whether the parents correctly implemented BST to teach those specific skills and whether the students did those specific skills. And then, don't worry, they're still going. That's why I know it's a dissertation.
Right.
They did a follow-up 1 month later to see how it's going, and they picked some skills from the book there too. So boom, that's a lot.
That is a lot.
So let's talk about the parents, because that's the thing that they were worried. That's the thing that they were worried. They were worrying. They were focusing on the best. So they did the generalization skill in baseline as well as just a regular vignette, and everyone scored pretty badly, below 20% parents, which just makes sense, right? Because you've never done BST. But following training, the train skill did increase for most people during the first training session. It increased to 77% to 97%. So 2 parents met the mastery criteria during the training and booster sessions. 2 parents required the self-monitoring procedure, and really only 3 to 9 sessions were needed to teach those BST skills, those 5 required BST skills. So that's pretty good, right? That if 2 people could get it right away. So 3 parents met mastery criteria during the first 3 trials of that parent-child post-training. 1 parent did need that self-monitoring checklist, but then once they had that self-monitoring checklist, it increased up to mastery. And then when we look at the participants, the children, during baseline, most of them did not join in the conversation more than 50% of the time. And so they were taught how to join the conversation using BST by their parents. And only 1 participant, Carter, learned the skill 100% following the parent-implemented BST. But everyone increased slightly, right, up from like 77% increase to like a 12% increase. So everyone did a little bit better, but only 1 student actually learned the skill. And for the parents during generalization, they all did fairly well except for Kathy, which I bet she was like face palming because she's the one that got 100% during the training sessions, and she forgot. The only thing she forgot to do was to provide an opportunity for role play, so she got a 60%. And I imagine if she got 100% that first time, she was like, no,
Yeah,
right?
Right, yeah.
I could totally see Kathy doing that. I mean, but yeah, so that's really what they said. So, we could teach parents how to do BST with some limited effectiveness with teaching these skills, but it is hard to teach these skills, right? So that's one limitation is social skills are hard.
They didn't pick easy skills.
They didn't pick easy skills. No, they were like, pick whatever you want in this book.
One of them is correcting another person. I'm terrible at that.
Right.
And interrupting appropriately.
I'm terrible at that.
I'm also terrible at that because it's just a big NR. I just, except for interrupting you right now, Jackie, I don't usually interrupt people. So.
But you're good at that. Interrupting me because I don't care. Right? But other people do care.
Yeah, they were hard skills. So
they were very hard skills. And so I think that's something to think about. And some of the limitations that they had is, again, like I told you, that because they were so focused on correcting the limitations of the Stewart et al. 2007, that they felt that they limited the flexibility and creativity of the parents because they were like, you need to follow this path. And so that's not necessarily how you might teach social skills, right? Because with social skills does come some flexibility and creativity, right, on how you're going to move into spaces. Yeah. But I think this is a really great starting point on looking at how we can incorporate parents into the process that they eventually will need to be doing.
Nailed it.
Awesome. All right. Well, it seems like
BST works.
BST works.
I'm sorry, that was a dissemination station.
Let's save it for the dissemination station, shall we? So now we're here at the dissemination station. So Diana, you started pre-disseminating. So why don't you
I'm so sorry.
Post-disseminate now.
So to work backwards, BST works. We want to be incorporating parents at every step of the process, including goal selection and building, I guess, skill building and goal building. And we should always be thinking about the bigger picture context when we're asking parents to participate in training, both in terms of how challenging or taxing this may be for them and what some secondary benefits might be related to their participation.
Yeah.
That's my summary.
That's a good summary. I think specifically to Kupsik and Lebrat in terms of that as a component, because those are skills that many folks out there might say, well, I'm not really an expert in academics, but I work in a school where academics are expected. And I would say you could probably take a lot of what's in that article and think about, well, who are the people that you collaborate with regularly? Could somebody else be involved? Is the teacher of the student able to do some of the kind of curricular-based assessments to sort of help you out? And then your focus is going to be less on the academic portion of that assessment and more on the taking that information and then tailoring it to kind of the brief assessment of, is this an issue of performance? Is this an issue of motivation? So is it skill or will, right? And then you can focus more on the training piece and the follow-up with the parents piece. So even if you're not able to do step 1 and 2 super well, great. How can you support the people in your school or building, wherever you are, that are the experts in the assessment, the direct testing piece when it comes to academics? So even in an area where you as a behavior analyst might not have all the answers of, oh, I don't know how to make the perfect treatment. Okay, great. But you do know how to train others. You do know how to do a component analysis. You do know how to experimentally test various interventions as sort of a minimal, little nitty gritty component analysis. So you can do that no matter the skill. I think you can always be a part of a team that's looking to improve their ability to give parents meaningful treatments. And then you can be the person who sort of gets it over the finish line in terms of the actual training. But if you've included a lot of these steps we talked about, I think you should be in a good position to have the parents on board, ready to go, and you've given them a treatment that should be effective and should be easy to run. And then you just use BST to finish it all out. And then you're monitoring afterwards. What's your monitoring? So you're maintaining contact with the family for more than just the data related to the actual initial, problem or area of improvement. Great. I think this one actually lent itself super nicely to just here's a bunch of things and now you can do them, which is nice. We don't always get that in these episodes.
Yeah, that's true.
Feel very good. Feel very good about that. And now we're going to move into the last segment of the show, pairings. Diana, what are the pairings for this episode?
Alrighty. If you enjoyed this episode, you may also enjoy listening to some episodes from our archives. And those would include episode 19, where we originally discussed parent training. It was parent training to decrease challenging behavior specifically. So all the way back to episode 19 to start your journey. You could also check out episodes 67 and 68, which was like one of our first book clubs, basically, but it's broken into 2 episodes, right, Rob?
Mm-hmm.
And in those 2 episodes, we discussed The Power of Positive Parenting by Dr. Glenn Latham. So I love that book.
It's
and
great. It's
you should check it out if you want to hear some more tips from him. You could also visit, although many listeners have, episode 103, which was a live from the Thompson Center episode where we discussed parent training and stress. And that one is available for a free CE as well, in case you want to check that out. I also thought maybe you'd want to hear episode 121, in which we discussed child welfare and systems of parent training with Dr. Jim Carr. Or you could check out either episode number 1 or number 162, both of which discuss infant behavior and tummy time specifically. And of course, while you are enjoying listening to those episodes, you might want to have a snack. So the snack today is one that many parents will find sounds familiar to them. So the snack for This pairing is a PB&J with the crust cut off, goldfish crackers, and a juice box. Please enjoy.
All right. Thank you, Diana. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the show. Thank you so much for listening. We'd really love it if you loved it as well, subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. There are some other places you can find us online. We're on all the socials as ABA Inside Track. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to get links to all of the episodes we've done, all of the articles we've discussed in those episodes, and to purchase CEs. You can find us on YouTube with these episodes posted with YouTube subtitling feature engaged. And of course, you can also go to our Patreon page for even more ABA Inside Track content. That's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where you can subscribe to get episodes a week ahead of time, as well as to vote in our quarterly listener episodes and to get access to our full-length book club episodes. As of the release of this one, our last big one, we certainly did one for Supervision September. We also do one for the summer for Walden 2, B.F. Skinner's Walden 2, as well as all of our previous book clubs. And for those live episodes, those listener choice episodes, and those book club episodes, you're able to get free CEs as a subscriber, as well as some other goodies and general discounts. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. Also, you probably want that second secret code word. Here it is, pear, P-E-A-R, the fruit. You can put it with your pairing if you so desired. Green pear, brown pear, whatever kind of pear you like. Pear. All right. Some final thanks. Big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturry for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his awesome editing work. We'll be back next week with another fun-filled episode. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.